The Houston Astros had one of the most impressive decade-long stretches in baseball history, making the American League Championship Series 7 years in a row, including 4 World Series appearances and 2 rings. After losing to Detroit in the first round last year, 2024 was the first season that they weren't in the ALCS since 2016. They've had their fair share of faces leave over this sustained successful run, but this season they decided to go into a completely different direction, shipping away players like Kyle Tucker and Ryan Pressly from their 2024 roster. You're going to see a lot of unfamiliar and new faces on this Houston Astros team, but Houston believes in their guys, and they think they can make a run back to the ALCS this season. If you enjoy this type of content, please subscribe to the channel. I'll be putting out the rest of these breakdowns by opening day. Let's dive into the 2025 Houston Astros organization. I'll quickly go over some ranks from the 2024 season. All of these rankings are completely objective. My rankings formula is going to be in the description of this video. Houston had the 11th ranked Major League roster last year, led by a couple pretty solid units. The lineup, rotation, and bullpen were all in the top half of the league, with the defense being just below that. Unfortunately, they're going to roll into 2025 with some pretty serious pitching injuries on their roster. We'll go over that when we get to the starting rotation section, but they do bring back a pretty solid bullpen and lineup for this team. One piece of this organization that is a bit scary is the farm system. They come in at 28th in my rankings, a 26th ranked group of minor league pitchers, and a 21st ranked group of minor league hitters. There are a couple solid guys that we'll get to that are going to contribute to this roster as soon as this year. There's a couple top prospects that I do really like, but overall not a ton of depth in this system. Joe Espada rolls into his second season as the manager of the Houston Astros. He took over for Dusty Baker after he retired from the game. 88-73 last season. And then interesting, Dana Brown, the general manager of this team, Houston decided to move on from their past general manager after winning a World Series title. Not exactly sure how things are delegated in their front office, but I do know Dana Brown is the general manager here. 2 playoff appearances in his 2 seasons here. Really solid record for him as the general manager. Made a couple really good moves, I think, for this team long term. The Astros last season, 88-73, they won the AL West, 4th in the American League. They had a pretty big payroll last year of $244 million. This season cut down to $218 million. That kind of seems to be where this organization is headed right now, as we'll see that they moved on from a couple pretty big major league players that were set to make some real money. They're projected to be 88-74 this season, 2nd in the American League West and 3rd in the American League. Yes, they did play 161 games last year. I fact-checked that a few times. Their playoff odds this season are just below 70%. Top 100 draft capital, 21-95 for this team. They did lose a first-round pick in signing Christian Walker in free agency. 21st pick should be nice for them, but they do have a pretty big gap in terms of where they pick next after that. In terms of contracts on this roster, not a ton of huge ones. Jose Altuve still making $25 million. Houston extended him for a pretty long time. He'll be an Astro for the rest of his career. Christian Walker came over in free agency this year, making $20 million on a 3-year deal. And then Yordan Alvarez may be the best contract in baseball in terms of production. I understand it's covering some of his arbitration years, but regardless, one of the best hitters in the game at $19.2 million is just a steal for Houston. They made the playoffs last season. This is the first team in the rankings that made the playoffs last year. Their park factor is 100. That's just a factor of measuring if you're playing in a hitter or a pitcher's park. Houston's right in the middle of the league, right below league average. In terms of organization success, last season their AAA team, the Sugarland Space Cowboys, were incredible. 93-56 last year. Outside of that, though, not a ton of success here. All the other teams are a bit below 500. And we'll roll that right into some season storylines for this group. I think the biggest thing here, it's really a new era in Houston. A lot of old faces are gone. Alex Bregman gone. Kyle Tucker traded to Chicago. Ryan Pressly traded to Chicago. A lot of the guys from their World Series runs and a couple of the really solid teams they've had in recent years not on this roster anymore after Houston decided to go into a different direction. Rotation depth is another one for me in season storylines. Hayden Wesneski pictured there, currently listed as the 5 starter. I think they have a pretty solid 5. They do have a lot of injuries right now, and that's really hurting them. But outside of those 5, not a ton of major league contributing options currently. And then defensive positions, kind of an interesting one to have in terms of season storylines, but we're going to see Jose Altuve move over to left field after playing second base his entire career this year. Brendan Rodgers going to move to second base most likely. Couple guys on this team that can play a lot of positions. Mauricio Dubon, for example, can really play everywhere. I'm going to be really interested to see how Houston decides to figure out their defensive positioning this season. So a big offseason in terms of additions and subtractions for the Astros. Isaac Paredes brought in the Kyle Tucker trade. alongside Hayden Wesneski. Both of those guys combined for a projected 4.5 WAR next season. They also made some free agent moves. Christian Walker coming over on a 3-year, $60 million deal to play first base here. Brendan Rodgers and Jalen Beeks, both on minor league deals, both projected to contribute a little bit to this roster. I think Rodgers will be the starting second baseman. And then a lot of subtractions here for Houston. Tucker and Bregman, your two big guys, two of your biggest faces in the Astros organization as of recently. Tucker got traded to Chicago, Bregman over to Boston in free agency. Yusei Kikuchi came to Houston last year at the deadline and had 10 incredible starts. He's over to the Angels on a free agent deal. Ryan Presley also over to Chicago, but in a separate trade, a really big reliever. Jason Hayward, actually a pretty solid season last year for Houston as well. Justin Verlander, a big one. He's been here for a while, had his first big step back last year. He's over to San Francisco on a 1-year free agent deal. And then Caleb Ferguson came over to Houston last year, and he's over in Pittsburgh now. Before I dive into this lineup, I'll go over a couple of the numbers on the screen. WOBA stands for weighted on base average. Think about it as a version of on base percentage, but it's weighted differently. So a home run is weighted more than a triple, which is weighted more than a double, etc. League average for that is going to be 310, just a better way of measuring how you get on base. And then weighted runs created plus, league average for that is 100. It's just a general offensive productivity stat. Every point above or below 100 is going to be the percent better or worse that you are compared to league average offensively. For example, Jose Altuve next season, 120 weighted runs created plus, expected to be 20% better than league average as a hitter and will roll into it. He's actually projected to be a top 10 left fielder in terms of WAR next season, although he's never played the position before. Another good projected year for him next year. He took a bit of a step back offensively last year, but still has a lot in him. Isaac Paredes, a really interesting one for this crew, brought over from Chicago here to play third base, also top 10 in projected WAR next season. Yordan Alvarez, if Shohei Ohtani didn't exist, would be the best DH in baseball, projected to be 71% better than league average, 36 homers and 5.7 WAR without playing the field at all. Christian Walker, not top 10 at his position, but right around it, projected to have a really solid year, 31 homers. Yainer Diaz, a really solid hitting catcher, 21 homers on the projection next year, 17% better than league average. Solid younger shortstop in Jeremy Pena, 3% better than league average on the projections. He was just about league average as a hitter last year. He'll get a lot of his wins above replacement from his defense. Chas McCormick expected to take a big leap forward this season after a tough 2024. And then Brendan Rodgers and Jake Meyers, the two guys projected under 100 weighted runs created plus. Rodgers brought in on that minor league deal to play second base here. I think he could have a better season than this. They're really conservative with this one. And then Jake Meyers, a guy who can give you really solid defense, but not a ton with his bat. If he can be about a league average hitter, I think you feel really good about what he's doing for you. In terms of the bench, a couple pretty solid players here in Victor Caratini and Dubon. They're both projected over 1 WAR next year. John Singleton, a first baseman on this bench, a lefty hitter, projected 0.1 WAR. And then Ben Gamel, an outfielder, projected 0.4 WAR in 2025. Before I even go into the pitchers in this rotation, I'm going to go over some of the injuries on this list currently by Fangraphs. JP France, Luis Garcia, Christian Javier, and Lance McCullers Jr. are all currently injured and on the IL. A couple of these guys will be making contributions to the team this year. I think Javier and McCullers will most likely be pitching alongside Garcia at some point, but this is what we're rolling with right now. Framber Valdez, one of the best lefties in the game and a projected top 30 starter in WAR next year, a 3.35 ERA, 181 innings on the projections. Hunter Brown, a younger guy who had a really good season last year, projected a 3.71 ERA and just under 3 WAR. Ronel Blanco, you might remember him from throwing a no-hitter last season, projected just over a 4 ERA and 1.5 WAR next season. And then two younger guys here in Spencer Arrighetti and Hayden Wesneski. Arrighetti, drafted by Houston and came up through the system, really gave some solid innings for the team last year and was a big prospect at one time. Hayden Wesneski acquired in that Kyle Tucker trade. Some other contributors here for the Astros in terms of some starting pitching are Colton Gordon and Ryan Gusto. We'll go over Colton Gordon a bit more in the prospects section. And then we'll get into a real interesting bullpen here. You know Josh Hader, one of the best closers in the game, brought over on a sizable contract to Houston. He's still projected to be great next season. Had a bit of a step back last year, but still a really good pitcher. Bryan Abreu, also been here for a while now, projected to have a real good season, over 30% on the strikeout rate. Taylor Scott, an interesting one, just under a 4 ERA. I think a pretty solid pitcher. And then a lot of youth here. Brian King, Caleb Ort, Forrest Whitley, and Nick Hernandez, all under 3 years of service time. A couple of those guys in King and Whitley projected under a 4 ERA next season. Stephen Okerd brought over on a minor league deal, another left-handed pitcher in this bullpen. Not the biggest group in terms of names, but a lot of solid projections here. And a couple guys that I think can give you some multi-inning outings in Whitley and Hernandez out of this bullpen. Before I get into these individual breakdowns, I'll go over a couple numbers on the screen here. The OFF, BSR, DEF, those are all going to be your offense, base running, and defensive run values by Baseball Savant. They'll be ranked in percentiles compared to the rest of the league. On the cards, there'll be a bunch of counting stats. Weighted runs created plus and WOBA. Remember, league averages are 100 and 310. And then the Baseball Savant page, that's going to have metrics for plate discipline, hard hit rates, defense, base running, and some expected numbers on there as well. Let's dive into it with Yainer Diaz, a really solid young catcher and a really valuable one at that. 3.4 WAR per 162. He derives a lot of his value from his offense as a catcher, but also really valuable at blocking behind the plate. Not great in terms of framing, and that really hurt his run value defensively last year. But 70% better than league average offensively as a catcher. 16 homers last season. Hits the ball pretty hard. Had some really good expected numbers. He took a bit of a step back offensively from a really solid 2023 season, but again, he had a much larger sample this year. Just 377 plate appearances in 2023 and 846 OPS and 23 homers that year. This year, he went with more of a contact approach, hit just about 300, had 16 homers and 619 plate appearances. The two big things for him last season, he hit the ball on the barrel a lot more. That hard hit rate was a bit higher as well, and the launch angle sweet spot, which is the percent of the time that you hit the ball between 8 and 24 degrees in the air, was a solid amount higher last season, meaning that he didn't really hit the ball at advantageous launch angles to hit those home runs and get harder hit balls. A guy who's really only two flaws as a hitter are that he chases a lot and he doesn't walk very often, but he doesn't strike out very often either. Really got it going in the second half last season, though, an 828 OPS and 9 homers in 272 plate appearances in that second half. Hit 319. A really solid offensive catcher in Yainer Diaz. One that might not catch every single day and might eventually move to a different position because of the defense not being super great, but he is good in some areas there. Feel really good about Yainer Diaz. Quickly, I'll go over Victor Caratini, a switch hitting catcher, also been really valuable. 13% better than league average offensively last year, 81st percentile in defense, so he's the defensive catcher here. Really solid in a lot of the metrics by Baseball Savant. He's a guy who doesn't hit the ball super hard, but has really good plate discipline stats, and that really helps his game offensively. He's been around for a long time and has been a pretty valuable player. Victor Caratini, the backup catcher, feel pretty good about this group as a hitting and defensive platoon, and one of the better offensive young catchers in the game in Yainer Diaz. At first base, a new addition for this Astros team and one of the most consistent players in baseball, Christian Walker, 20% better than league average last season offensively, 26 homers in 130 games. He crushes the baseball. He's always up there in barrel rate and hard hit rate. A step back in terms of counting stats last year, but he didn't play as many games. I think he was still as good offensively. Defensively at first base, a plus defender. He's been in the 90th percentile plus of defensive run value the last 3 seasons. Great range over there at first base. So he's really a two-way first baseman, which you don't see very often. A guy with a lot of pop that Houston brought in on a 3-year, $60 million deal this offseason. He's entering his age 33 season. Took a bit of a step back in the second half last year, 689 OPS compared to an 838 in the first half, but I think a really solid player, one that hasn't shown signs of aging yet. I think a really good first baseman for Houston to have, especially in 2025. Another new addition here in Brendan Rodgers at second base, brought in on a minor league deal. Offensively, not a great season last year, although he has been pretty valuable per 162. Dealt with some injuries in Colorado and never really got it going to be the top prospect that he was drafted as. Not going to give you a ton in terms of defense or base running over at second base, but I think he can give you some offense. He hits the ball pretty hard. Last season just really struggled in terms of play discipline, and that kind of hurt his overall output. A guy who can give you some pop at times. He has played full seasons, but got hurt in 2023, missed almost the entire season. 3rd overall pick in 2015 for the Colorado Rockies. Really got it going in the second half last year, though, a 766 OPS and 7 homers. A guy who's really going to hit lefties well at 819 OPS against them last year and over 140 plate appearances. I think a real solid addition in terms of a minor league contract for Houston. There's a high floor here, and I think he can be a bit better in Houston this year. Brendan Rodgers currently listed as your second baseman by Fangraphs. Another new addition to this Houston Astros team, and Isaac Paredes, brought over from Chicago last season after starting with Tampa Bay. 4.0 WAR per 162, so a real valuable player. 317 WOBA, 19 homers. The expected numbers have never really liked Paredes, but he's really good in the plate discipline categories, and he can give you some above average defense at third base. A guy who's a big pull hitter, huge pull splits, really got hurt when he went over to Chicago because the ballpark isn't built for a player like that. I think he's going to have a really good season in Houston just because Houston is built for pull hitters from the right side. That could be seen pretty easily in his stats when he shifted to Chicago. Just a 632 OPS when he got traded over there after a 792 in Tampa last season. A guy who in his career has pulled the ball over 6.3% more than the average major league hitter. I think he's built for this ballpark, and I think Houston saw that and wanted to go acquire him in the Kyle Tucker trade. A real solid piece here, 26 years old. I think there's a lot left in Isaac Paredes. Jeremy Pena, the shortstop of this crew, another real valuable player, and the first guy here that has been with the Astros for a while in the majors. 3.3 WAR per 162 since he came up. 15 homers and 20 steals last year, played almost every single day. 89th percentile in the base running, the sprint speed is way up there. Took a big step back though defensively last year, not really what you like to see from the shortstop position. Another guy in this lineup who's not going to walk a ton but will strike out at a very low rate as well. The chase rate is very high for him. The launch angle sweet spot is very low, which I think is kind of a tough thing for him. In terms of offense, he's pretty much been the same player the last 3 seasons, 702, 705, and 715 OPS. Although he did have 22 homers in 2022, the defense is a bit scary. 92nd percentile in range in 22 and 77th in 23, compared to being all the way down to 29th last year. That's where he's going to derive a lot of his value, not being a way above average hitter. I think he needs to bring that defense back in 2025 to be a super positive player, but definitely a piece that Houston believes in at shortstop, and I think can definitely be an above average hitter. Not as high on Jeremy Pena as I once was because of the defensive floor, but I still think he can be a good player for this roster. Mr. Astro, Jose Altuve, don't really know what to do with this one, not seeing him at second base. He's in left field this year. It's going to be really interesting for him defensively. He was 11th percentile in defensive run value last season at second base. I don't really know how he's going to attack the left field switch. You don't see guys move from the infield to outfield at age 34 very often, but Jose Altuve is going to do it. He's been great offensively his entire career. 6.3 WAR per 162 the last 3 seasons, 27% better than league average offensively, 20 bombs, 22 steals. Really did overperform a lot of his expected numbers last year, so that is a bit of a scary sign for a guy that's getting up there in age. The K rate, again, not very high for him though. Took a pretty solid step back in terms of production from his 2023 and 2022 seasons. Had a 915 and a 920 OPS those 2 years. A lot of it is in terms of the plate discipline. He didn't whiff as much in 2023 and 2022, and the walk rate did go down by a decent amount last year as well. He really took a different approach and got more aggressive at the plate. And overall, I do think that kind of hurt his offensive output a decent amount. He is a guy who's known to overperform his expected numbers though, so I wouldn't see the expected numbers on the screen as a huge sign in the wrong direction for him. I am a bit worried about the chase rates and the walk rates going down a lot. I think we see a pretty solid season from Altuve here in 2025, but I don't know if we're going to get the 2023 or 2022 Jose Altuve just because of the plate discipline numbers. Jake Meyers here in center field, 28 years old, one of the better defenders in center field that we have in the entire game. His range is up there in the top 3rd percentile. Really solid runner as well, 77th percentile in base running, and the sprint speed is way up there. He had 13 homers last year, which is a pretty solid thing for a guy who's such a good defender. Not a lot of good expected stats, and the numbers weren't great on the surface either. 14% worse than league average, but he can be a very valuable player in the fact that he plays defense in a premium position very well. A big step back for Meyers post All-Star last year, a 526 OPS compared to a 736 in the first half. He's a guy who does hit lefties really well though, 758 OPS against the left side, not a lot from the plate against righties. One thing to keep in mind if you're the Astros, batting 8th, he had a 786 OPS in 90 plate appearances. I think that's the spot for him in the lineup. But Meyers is more of a high floor player than anything at the center field position because he brings you pretty solid base running and really, really good defense in center. Not a great hitter, but a guy who's going to be in here every day and make great defensive plays in center field. Chas McCormick is your right fielder here for the Astros, and before I even go into anything, I think Houston has a monopoly on right-handed hitting, left-handed throwing outfielders. Jake Meyers and McCormick both have that in their bag, just a really interesting thing to see on a major league roster. But Chas McCormick took a pretty big step back offensively last year, just 94 games for him, so he wasn't out there every day, but he was 34% worse than league average last year, just 5 homers and 8 stolen bases, didn't put a lot of good stuff out there offensively. None of the numbers on the Savant page are above league average. A pretty solid defender in right field though, really good in range. The arm strength isn't great, but he can definitely make up for that in terms of how good his range is out there. A pretty solid base runner as well. The sprint speed is way up there. 2023 for McCormick, an 842 OPS, 22 homers, and 19 stolen bases in 457 plate appearances. A real good year for him in 2023. Things to notice from him that year, the launch angle sweet spot for him was great. All of the expected numbers liked him a lot more. He was hitting the ball on the barrel a lot more, and the hard hit rates were a lot higher. He was going through injuries last year, so I wonder if that hampered his performance a decent amount, because he was a really above average hitter against major league pitching in 2023, specifically lefties. He had a 1.009 OPS against left-handed pitching. In 2024, just a 550 OPS against lefties in only 20 less plate appearances. I think a guy who just needed a get-right offseason. I think he can come in here and be a valuable player for Houston. He is going to be a free agent after the 2026 season, so he needs a couple of good years stacked on top of each other to get a good contract. I think I feel better about Chas McCormick not being injured this season. Hopefully he can give you closer to that 2023 production in 2025. What is there to say about Yordan Alvarez that hasn't already been said? One of the best hitters in the league right now. He hits the ball harder than almost anybody. The bat speed is way up there. Incredible plate discipline. He was 68% better than league average offensively last year. 35 homers, over a 400 WOBA. 6.5 WAR per 162, and a guy who doesn't play any defense. Just an incredible baseball player. One of the most fun at-bats to watch in the entire league. 98th percentile in offensive run value last year. A dude who's just done it every step of the way in his career. He's been great every single season. He hits both lefties and righties well. He hits every type of pitch well. He hits good in the regular season, hits better in the postseason. He steps up in big moments. Just one of the greatest hitters that we have to offer in this game. I'm looking to see if Yordan Alvarez can give me 40 homers or more this year. He's never gotten over 37 in a season in his career. The only thing he doesn't do well at the plate is the chase rate is below league average, and the launch angle sweet spot is at 65th percentile. Outside of that, an absolute demon in the box. Maybe the last guy you want to see if you're a pitcher. Barring Shohei Ohtani, probably the best DH in all of baseball. We'll go into a bench group here. Mauricio Dubon can really play everywhere on the field. Not going to bring you a ton of value offensively, but he brings his value in the fact that he can play so many different positions. 30 years old, he's been around here for a while, a really solid utility player for Houston. John Singleton, a first baseman, had a pretty solid year last year offensively. A real power bat more than anything. Not going to bring any value really base running or defensive wise, and a first baseman only, or maybe a DH here and there. And then Ben Gamel, an outfielder. He can be rangy at times. He was 15% better than league average last year in just 38 games. 2 left-handed hitters in Singleton and Gamel on this bench, and then Dubon, a righty, really solid utility player. Not the best bench in terms of depth, but a couple guys who can give you at-bats here and there, and then Dubon can play everywhere on the field, Gamel everywhere in the outfield. I think a pretty solid lineup here in Houston. A couple guys that need to take steps forward back to where they were, but you got Yordan Alvarez, Jose Altuve, Isaac Paredes, some really good players here in Houston. We'll roll into the pitching side here. I'll go over a couple of the numbers here. All the stuff on the right side of the screen is going to be your run values, pitching run value, fastball run value, breaking run value, off-speed run value. On the screen, just a lot of the same in terms of metrics. I have your pitch usage, your miles per hour, and then league average on there for that side. And then on the cards, innings pitched, ERA. I went with WAR per season just because of the pitching injuries that have been happening recently. FIP stands for fielding independent pitching. We think of it as a projector for ERA over a long sample. And then stuff and location plus, 2 models built by Eno Saris at Fangraphs, really just measures how good your stuff is as a pitcher compared to league average, and then how good you are at locating pitches compared to league average. Again, with those plus stats, 100 is going to be league average for him. And let's talk Framber here, a really solid ace for this rotation. Under a 3 ERA last year, had pretty solid stuff. Location was at league average. A real good ground ball pitcher in the fact that he gets the ball on the ground more than almost anybody. Last season, he did give up some hard contact. The hard hit rate is down there in the bottom 10th percentile in baseball, and the average exit velocity is also the other worst stat on the Savant page. Really good in terms of run value. The pitching run value, fastball, and breaking run values are all way up there. Really the Iron Man in this rotation, and a guy who's been solid for a long time. 176, 198, and 201 innings the last 3 seasons. 28, 31, 31 starts. A 3.45 ERA in 2023 and a 2.82 in 2022. He really took a step forward in all of his run values last season. That made him a really good pitcher. Real good numbers across the board for Framber. Maybe overperformed a couple of his stats by just a little bit, but even then would still have really good season numbers. The ace of your staff in Houston in Framber Valdez. I was not familiar with how good of a pitcher Hunter Brown was last season before I went into the numbers. A 3.49 ERA, 3.58 on the FIP, league average or above stuff and location plus. Really good at limiting hard contact last season. The barrel rate, hard hit rate, and average exit velocity are way up there in terms of percentiles. Gets more strikeouts than league average. Did have a bit of an issues with the walks. The percentage is a bit below league average. Didn't generate as many chases or whiffs on his pitches, but overall he did such a great job last season for this Astros team. A guy who really struggled in 2023, got roughed around. A 5.09 ERA in 31 games, 29 starts. The average exit velocity, barrel rates, and hard hit rates were way up there in terms of the league in 2023. Did such a good job at figuring out how to limit hard contact last season, and that led to such a jump in success for Hunter Brown. He traded a bit of the strikeout stuff for stuff that's going to give him soft contact, and that worked out really well. Just 26 years old, a guy who's very similar in mechanics to Justin Verlander, a right-handed pitcher here for Houston, been very valuable, specifically last season. Real good number 2 long-term for the Houston Astros. Ronel Blanco, one of the bigger guys in the league in discrepancies from ERA to FIP last season. He was really good at locating his pitches, and that helped him out a lot. His breaking pitches were incredible last year. The changeup, one of the best in the game. 99th percentile in run value there. Didn't do a great job at limiting hard contact in terms of limiting barrels last season, but the hard hit rate is pretty low for him. Didn't give up a super high average exit velocity as well. Generated some whiffs and some chases to an above league average number. Just really struggled with the walks last year and gave up too many barrels. Outside of that, though, 92nd percentile in pitching run value. A great season for Ronel Blanco. Last year was his full season of real major league run. He did get 52 innings in 2023, but 167 last year. Just took a huge step forward with his breaking pitches in 2024, and that really allowed him to succeed. The fastball, not a great pitch for him, but it was a bit better than in 2023, and that really helped him work off of his breaking pitches, I think. I think there's more there for Blanco in terms of what he can do with his off-speed. His slider and his curve weren't great last year. I think that can take a step forward, and I think that's where he needs to evolve as a pitcher to really be super successful. A real solid 3, though, specifically in terms of numbers he gave last year. You feel really good about Ronel Blanco as a 3 starter in this rotation. Spencer Arrighetti, 25 years old, a former top prospect of Houston, a 4.53 ERA last year, but the expected numbers were much better for him. I expect a really big step forward from Arrighetti next year. 4.18 on the FIP and a 4.05 on the ERA. He got a lot of strikeouts last year, but didn't get a lot of balls on the ground and walk too many guys. I think if he's able to fix those 2 things, he becomes one of the better pitchers in this rotation. The breaking pitches last year were great for him. The fastball and off speed were not, and that really led to the ERA being way up above league average in terms of stuff. The location for him wasn't great, and I think that's where he can be really good. I think that's a positive for him also long term. Never a guy with real solid numbers in the minors, but always had really good stuff. In AAA last season, he did have a 2.16 ERA when he was down there, so I think he really did figure it out. Call me too optimistic, but I feel really good about Spencer Arrighetti long term. I think he has the stuff to figure it out at the major league level, and I think he can be an above average 4 starter for this Houston crew. Your 5 start here is Hayden Wesneski over from Chicago in the Kyle Tucker trade. Only 7 starts last year, but made a lot of appearances out of the bullpen. A 3.86 ERA. The FIP and expected ERA didn't like him as much last year. Not great with the stuff, but the location was above average. A guy who's going to throw that sweeper over 40% of the time. Really a positive pitch for him. He had a 3.86 ERA last season, a 4.63 the season before that, so he did take a step up as a pitcher. The breaking run value for him went from 90th 58th percentile in 2023 to just 62nd in 2024, but he really did get better in every other area on the Savant page last year. A guy who's not going to limit hard contact as well in terms of barrels, but doesn't give up a super high average exit velocity. The Astros definitely see the ceiling of Wesneski as a pretty solid pitcher. Hopefully they can stretch him out and he can become a decent 5-starter, but there's some other options coming back from injuries for Houston that will definitely take a place in this rotation. As a fellow Hayden, I can respect his game though. Hayden Wesneski, the number 5 starter in this rotation. A solid back end of this bullpen in Houston as well. Josh Hader, the closer here, struck out just about 40% of the batters he faced, but gave up a lot of hard contact last year, and that led to a higher ERA for him. The barrel rate in the bottom 10th percentile of baseball and the average exit velocity in the bottom 75th percentile in baseball. Interestingly for him, he was 87th percentile in average exit velocity in 23 and 92nd in barrel rate that year as well. Caught too many barrels, and that led to the high ERA. He was a 1.28 ERA pitcher in 2023. Bryan Abreu, another guy who's been really solid here for Houston. Really good stuff for him. The location was really tough last year, just about a 10% walk rate. Another guy who just gave up too much hard contact last season. The average exit velocity, 11th percentile. The walk rate also way down there for him. He had a 1.75 ERA in 23, a 1.94 in 2022. Those seasons, he just let his strikeout stuff play a lot more and didn't give up as much hard contact. I think a step forward for Bryan Abreu in 2025. And then Tayler Scott, a really good season in terms of surface numbers for him. The expected numbers didn't really like him as much last year. He just walked way too many guys, 12.4% on the walk rate. A guy who really limited hard contact though, 98th percentile in barrel rate. The average exit velocity and hard hit rates are in the 75th percentile. Not a super hard thrower, but a guy who's going to get some soft contact on bats. We'll roll into the rest of this bullpen here. Brian King, a lefty in this pen, a really solid season for him last year. 2.39 ERA, a 2.71 FIP, so really good underlying numbers as well. A guy who got a ton of strikeouts and really limited hard contact. A great season for him in his first run in the majors last year. Caleb Ort, another pretty big discrepancy in the ERA and FIP. A really small sample for him last year, but he did strike out 28% of the batters he faced. A hard-throwing righty. Really good underlying numbers for him on the Savant page, though. Really good on the chase rate, the K rate, barrel rate. Average exit velocity is not very high. The expected ERA at just 2.98. I think he's going to have a really good year this year. Steven Okert, a lefty reliever, brought in on a minor league deal, had a really big step back last season, but has been really solid in the majors, been around with Miami and Minnesota in the past. More of a junk ball guy than anything. He's going to throw about 67% slider and changeup. Forrest Whitley didn't get a lot of run in the majors last year, so I went with his AAA stats on the screen. A 2.12 ERA, but again, the FIP is really high for him. Did strike out 31% of batters in AAA, though. The Savant stats aren't great with him, but he's a guy who throws 7 pitches. I think he can figure it out. He was the 17th pick in the 2016 draft and been a prospect for Houston for a while. And then finally, Nick Hernandez here. A solid year for him last year. Didn't have much run in the majors, so I went with his AAA stats. Great underlying numbers for him, though. Almost all of the stats on the Savant page are way up there for him. I think a really solid pitcher, really underrated one. Only 11 innings in the majors in his career. That'll bring us into the prospect section of this video, and we'll get started with the only top 100 prospect in the Astros organization and the crown jewel of the Kyle Tucker trade in Cam Smith. A first-round pick from just last season, played at Florida State in college, a really solid college bat, and got up to Double-A last year already after being drafted last season. Really good third base prospect, had really good numbers in a short run in the minors last season. 60 on the power, a 60 arm, a 55 hit tool, so an advanced hitter for his age. Only 21 years old, but a guy I think we're going to see up in the majors sooner rather than later. I think long-term, there's a shot that he learns one of the corner outfield positions and he just slots into that lineup as quickly as possible. I promise you, if Cam Smith keeps hitting like this in the minors, he'll be up very, very soon. A really good third base prospect and their only guy in the Baseball America top 100. Jacob Melton, been a high prospect in the system for a while, a second-round pick in 2022, but took a step back offensively last season, got up to Double and Triple-A, a 736 OPS over 105 games there. Does have some pop in his bat, 15 homers down there last season, a 330 WOBA and 95 on the weighted runs created plus, so he was a bit below league average. Really solid tools across the board for him though, a 50 hit, 50 power, 60 run, 55 field, and 50 arm, so he's really good in all areas. Needs to get that bat a little better. I think if he can be an above average hitter at AAA to start the season, they'll bring him up really quickly. I think he can supplement this outfield and really be a welcome piece, especially offensively. And then Bryce Matthews here on the right, I think almost my favorite prospect in this system. Just such good numbers last season offensively, really moved up the levels. He went from rookie ball to high A to double A and triple A all just last season. Had really good numbers, an 865 OPS, 15 homers, 142 weighted runs created plus last season. A 55 power tool is really his carrying tool. The run is really good as well. Not a super good defender at shortstop. I would guess long term he's going to move off of that position. But for a guy who just recently got into this system, getting up to AAA already at just 22 years old, I think we might see Bryce Matthews on some top 100 lists going into next season if he isn't in the majors. A real solid top 3 in terms of infield prospects for the Astros. Zach DeZenzo, a shortstop, 24 years old, got up to the majors last year. Some really solid tools in the hit, run, and power. The arm is good as well. Just a bit below league average in the majors last year. Got 65 plate appearances, a 648 OPS. Really solid bat speed, which is a really good sign for him long term. Real solid minor league numbers for DeZenzo. I wouldn't expect him to be the shortstop, but I think he'll be up in Houston and playing a lot this year. Walter Janek, a catcher here for Houston. Really good defensively. Not the most advanced hitter, but really brings a lot of high floor. A first-round pick last year of Houston, kind of struggled in the minors. We'll see if he can pick that up offensively. Shea Whitcomb, definitely going to be up in the majors this year. He got up there with Houston last season. Not great surface numbers, but the advanced stuff really did like him. His expected WOBA was way up there, and he has really good plate discipline stats. Makes me feel really good about Shea Whitcomb moving forward. Yancel Villarreal, 19 years old and A-ball, the number 29 prospect here for Houston. 50 power tool. Everything else is a bit below average. A solid catching prospect, though, for Houston. And then Caden Powell, drafted last season. 6th round pick out of Seminole State. Really solid numbers last year for him. A really good power tool. I think definitely one that's going to move up these ranks pretty soon. Going into these outfield prospects, Luis Baez, really solid power and really solid arm. 20 years old, got up to double A last year, the number 13 prospect in the system. Pretty small sample in double A for him last year, but didn't have great numbers. Just 61 plate appearances to a 644 OPS. Was really solid in high A last year for Asheville. I think a high rising prospect in this system. Joseph Sullivan, a 22-year-old and a draft pick last year, got up to A, just a little bit of run there. Really solid in terms of run, field, and arm. The hit tool is really good. Not a lot of pop in his bat. Zach Cole, a guy that I would probably expect to be on the major league roster at some point this year. 24 years old, the number 18 prospect. Another real high floor guy, but a guy with a lot of pop as well. A 55 power, a 60 run, a 60 field, and a 70 arm. Did just get up to double A for the first time last year. 70 games there, a 710 OPS, 10 homers in 70 games. Pedro Leon, a guy that I think is going to be on the Major League roster again this year. 80 run tool, 60 field, 60 arm. Real common theme of this crew is a lot of high floor, not a ton of hit. Kevin Alvarez is really the only guy that breaks that mold, and he's coming in to be an international signing from this offseason, one of the higher ranked international signings in the entire class. Really solid tools across the board, a real solid hitter, 16 years old, has yet to play in the Astros system and already the number 12 prospect. Miguel Ulala, I believe is how you say it. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. 22 years old, got up to AAA last year. A plus fastball, their number 6 prospect. I would absolutely expect him to make his major league debut this year. Really good strikeout numbers for him. The walk rate is a bit too high. Didn't have great numbers last year, but I think he's going to have a good season in 2025. Ryan Ferrucci, a draft pick from last year, also the number 7 prospect in this system, plus fastball, plus slider, needs to develop the curveball a little bit, and the changeup is a solid pitch. Good control for him. He's 22 years old, a college pitcher for the Astros. Ryan Gusto, I mentioned a guy that might contribute to this major league roster. A really solid changeup, not a lot of other great pitches, but a good control guy. He's 25 years old in AAA. In AAA last season, a 3.7 ERA in 26 starts, 29 games total, 148 innings. So he's shown that he can develop a major league workload. Colton Gordon, a lefty, 26 years old, another guy who I think will be up in the majors this year. Again, pretty solid stats at the minor league level. He's got a lot of pitches to his arsenal. Doesn't really have a great pitch. The slider is definitely the best out of his crop. Those two guys in Gusto and Gordon, I think, will be up in the majors. AJ Blubbaugh, another guy that might make his major league debut this year. 55 on the changeup. Again, another big pitch guy, more than solid pitch guy. If he can develop a couple of those pitches, he ends up being a long-term option, but really just the slider and changeup as above average pitches right now. We'll roll that into the projected 2028 lineup, and it's a decent mix between some prospects and already major league guys. Yainer Diaz already in the majors, projected to be the first baseman long term. I do like that for him. I don't think he has a lot of high potential as a catcher, but a really solid hitter. And we have Walker Janik taking his spot as the catcher. Really need to see that offense develop a bit more, but definitely a high floor guy because he plays such good defense at the position. Jose Altuve, they have still in second base long term. I think I would expect him to move back into the infield. I don't know if the left field thing is going to work out for him, but I do have high hopes for him. Zach DeZenzo at third base. Shortstop, they have Bryce Matthews. I do feel really good about that. I don't know if the glove is as good as maybe Pena long term, but if Bryce Matthews does develop a little bit on the defensive side, I believe in his bat a lot. Really like him as the shortstop long term. Left field, they have Shea Whitcomb, 29 years old in 2028. Moving from the infield to the outfield does kind of make sense for him. Jacob Melton in center field, and then Cam Smith they have moving to right field. I do really like that spot for him, especially if third base is taken by another player here. This was before the Isaac Paredes trade, so I would expect him to be the third baseman long term, but I do think Cam Smith can be that right fielder. I think he can develop really well as a defensive outfielder. And then, of course, Yordan Alvarez, still only 31 years old in 2028. A decent lineup here, a couple not great spots offensively in Janik and DeZenzo maybe, but I think you feel good about the floor of this team, specifically with the defense, a couple solid defenders here, and a couple pretty good bats. Only Altuve and Alvarez over 30 in this lineup as well. And then we're going to go into the projected 2028 rotation and closer. I'll start off here with Josh Hader. They do still have him being the closer here, and I would expect that to be the case. I think I feel good about Hader long term. He hasn't had really any big injuries in the past, knock on wood for him, but I think he can get back to being the Josh Hader that he has been in the past. A lot of the numbers are still there. He just caught too many barrels last year, and I don't know if that's something that will roll over year after year. Ronel Blanco they have as the 5 starter. I think long term a pretty solid option as a 5. Ryan Ferrucci, the number 4 starter in this rotation, a good college pitcher that the Astros drafted last year, has yet to make his minor league debut, so we'll see how he develops in the minors. Miguel Yalola, the number 3 starter long term. I do like him in this rotation, and I think he definitely has a spot here. Spencer Arrighetti, maybe my favorite pitcher on this team, in this entire organization. I think he takes a big step forward this year. I have a lot of optimism for what Spencer Arrighetti can bring to the table. And then the number 1 starter in Hunter Brown. I think there's definitely some potential upside long-term for Brown to be the best pitcher in this rotation. A lot of guys that are currently on this roster not listed in the projected 2028 rotation, so we might see a pretty big overhaul in this entire roster by 2028. Guys like Framber Valdez, Christian Javier, Lance McCullers not listed on this projected 2028 rotation. I could definitely see a youth movement in Houston happening. That's something that they've kind of been going towards the past couple of years anyways. A couple of the trades they made this offseason, the Tucker trade and the Ryan Presley trade, are really pushing them in that direction. And then we'll just get into some final thoughts from me about this team. This is kind of my place to be a little subjective on what I think is going to happen. I don't really know where I land right now on the Houston Astros. I like a lot of the pieces in the lineup. I'll start there. Obviously, Yordan Alvarez is a great hitter. Christian Walker, I think, is a great hitter. Yainer Diaz, really solid. There's just a couple guys that took steps back offensively in 2024. I don't know if they have a lot in the tank offensively. Guys like Jeremy Pena, Chas McCormick, I think he has it, but really didn't show it last season. Jose Altuve getting up there in age as well. Jake Meyers more of a defensive player than anything. I think this is really a year where a lot of the young guys are going to come up. We're going to see a lot of turnover in the Major League roster. The bench isn't super deep by any means. Rotation-wise, obviously dealing with a lot of injuries. A lot of players I mentioned aren't going to be on the roster to start the season, but I think they can come in and really supplement this team. The guys like Christian Javier, Lance McCullers, and Garcia that are going to play a little bit this year, I think can be positives. Still love Framber Valdez for next season. Hunter Brown had a really good year, and I feel great about Spencer Arrighetti long term. I think he's going to be one of my breakout picks for this season. Feel okay about the rotation. I think the bullpen is kind of where it's a tough spot for me. A couple guys in there that I do really like. I expect Hader to bounce back this year. Bryan Abreu, still a pretty solid pitcher, but there's a couple guys in there that just didn't have the numbers that they were expected to have last year. And then a few guys that just didn't really have major league experience in Forrest Whitley and Nick Hernandez. Stephen Okert, also a pretty tough year last year. I feel good about Hader, Abreu, King, and Ort in that bullpen. Outside of that, I don't know if it's really a strength of this team. Losing Ryan Pressly did really hurt this squad. Organization-wise, they definitely need some work in terms of their minor league system, but they've done a pretty solid job in their trades. Love Cam Smith, love what they brought over in that Kyle Tucker package. In 2025, I think they stay competitive. I don't know if I can ever count out Houston to be one of the best teams in the American League, but roster-wise, I just don't know if I see it as much this year. I think they play in a tough division now. Seattle and Texas are pretty solid. The A's got a lot better this offseason as well. I think I would still have Houston making the playoffs, but I think my mind could be changed as I move closer towards the season. So thank you guys for checking this out. This entire video was just made by me. Please subscribe if you like the videos. I'll be putting out the rest of these by opening day. This was a really fun one to do. This was a breakdown of the 2025 Houston Astros organization.